all of the intricacies of the grammar.
So Sam, it's good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you.
How have you been?
I've been good. I just got back from vacation for a week. I was in Albania and Montenegro with my girlfriend.
Super.
So I'm feeling rested, feeling happy to be back in Prague. And
so what were you doing there? Were you just relaxing, or were you doing any exploring?
Yeah, so we went to Albania for the first half of the week, first 4 days, and traveled all around the country. Saw some towns, some nature. It was really awesome. And then in Montenegro, we were in the Bay of Kotor, which was really relaxed and sort of going to the beach every day. It was awesome.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So life was really a beach.
Life was, yes, that's right.
Okay. I actually have a student, I think, that is going to Albania pretty soon. And if I'm not mistaken, I think another one of my friends actually went there recently. So it's like, is that really?
It's like the new beach destination, I think, in Europe, you know.
Okay.
People are getting enough of Spain and Italy, and they're going to Albania, where it's, you know, the beaches are just as amazing.
Really?
But it's cheaper. It's, I think, less tourism overall. So I think it's the next fun destination.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did you think about Montenegro?
Yeah, Montenegro was super, super cool. Partly because I understood a good deal of the language.
Really?
Yeah, I did. Especially coming from Albania in the first half of the week, where not at all a Slavic language, not related to, you know, any other European language, basically.
It's Romance, isn't it? Or is it?
I don't think it's Romance. It branched off super early. I think it's Indo-European, but. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to say something wrong on camera. So I don't remember exactly, but it's not. I don't think it's Romance. No.
But just for the record, like, we're not experts.
Right.
We know some things.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Despite the linguistics degree,
does Albanian have some kind of close relative? Maybe.
I don't think so, actually.
Okay.
Not in one of the surrounding countries.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what its closest relative would be, actually.
Okay.
To be honest, I didn't hear a ton of it. You know, I could have been made to believe it was like a Uralic sounding language, but I don't think it has any relation. Yeah. But Montenegrin, of course, is, I mean, Slavic, and I think people call it Montenegrin or Serbo-Croat, you know, I mean, all the same, right? Those types of, or very similar, those languages down there. So it was nice to go to a place where they spoke a Slavic language and understand a little bit, at least. It felt like, I was able to understand people a bit more and communicate, which was a good feeling, you know?
So, yeah, because I actually wanted to ask you then, like, when you're in these countries, and you're someone who travels a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've traveled to what are some places you've traveled
to? I've been to 33 countries now, I think, in total.
I didn't know
lot
that.
of it, over sort of my whole life. I've been keeping track, yeah.
Okay.
I do a lot of traveling for work, so and for that I mean mostly like Poland and Germany. But I've been to a lot of European countries. I'm really interested in all of the sort of former Yugoslav countries and the Balkans. So that's why I went to this place.
Okay.
But yeah, I've done a ton of traveling.
And when you're in all these different countries, how do you do with either the language or English? Like, what's your experience trying to use the language, or do you just default to always using English? Yeah,
that's a good question. I think, given that I know Czech, I think wherever there's a Slavic language, I feel like I can pick up a little bit of it, and I try, you know, to at least say hello and thank you and goodbye, you know, those types of things, in that language. I think that with some other languages, if I'm only there for a couple days, it's so difficult to sort of pick up like how to say thank you and please, that I don't want to sound like the American tourist who is sort of tokenizing the language.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. But like at the same time, I feel like it's better now. French people might disagree, I think, because I've heard that French people want you to speak either English or like perfect French.
Right.
So maybe it depends on the country and the culture around foreigners being there. But like I always take it as it's better to try in the language and I would say you still succeed, not perfectly, but you try in a language, versus I don't want to be in a country where I force English onto the other people.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel, but I feel uncomfortable because they don't know where I'm from, and maybe I'm some foreigner who really learned English really well. But I know that I'm American, and I know that maybe they don't want to speak English or something, but I feel weird speaking English in a different country.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Definitely. I do also like to try to speak as much of the language as I can.
I mean, I think again though, like if you don't know much of the language and you have to kind of do the conversation in English, and then you still try to end it at least with saying thank you or see you or whatever that ending thing is, even if it's just one word.
Right.
I feel like that's still good.
Yeah. I think so too. It's understanding that that's their language, and that's like, it means something to them to say things in their language.
So how do we say thank you in Montenegrin?
Hvala.
Hvala. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can remember that because I think it's the same in Croatian and Serbian and Bosnian.
I think so.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Okay. What about Albanian? Do we know it?
Faleminderit. Faleminderit. Something like that.
Faleminderit?
Faleminderit. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's pretty long.
Yeah.
I'm not going to remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then for the viewers out there, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where are you from in the U.S.?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from Montana originally. Born and raised in a tiny town there, a little ski town. And I studied at Harvard, and I studied linguistics, which was my first sort of introduction into like the world of learning and loving new languages, to be honest. Yeah, I think I studied Spanish in high school, but even through my senior year, I never really fell in love with it or treated it as something that I, wanted to pursue seriously. But then in college, I got the bug and I wanted to study linguistics and then eventually learn Czech, and, bringing me to where I am today.
And before college, did you have the same experience where your schools offered multiple languages, or did you guys have only Spanish as your option?
We had Spanish and French. Okay. Yeah. And there was, and you had to take one of them in my high school. I think you had to take at least 1 year of a language.
Okay.
And there was a big divide between the Spanish and the French learning kids.
Like who was better at it, or?
Yeah, it was. They were sort of. It was like we were two teams. There was the French group and the Spanish group, and we stuck up our noses at each other just because the Spanish group didn't like French and the French group didn't like Spanish. It was kind of a funny dynamic. Okay. Yeah.
And when did French become an option for you guys? Did it become an option at middle school or high school?
High school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Only. Yeah. I mean, my hometown is very, very small, so they were limited. I think French teachers and Spanish teachers as well. Yeah.
And were your Spanish teachers like native speakers, or did you have Americans maybe with some kind of Spanish Hispanic background who learned it? And
just Americans actually with no Spanish background other than having learned it herself, my teacher. Okay. I think that was the same in the French teacher's case, that they had learned it 20, 30 years prior and they were teaching it to us.
And how many people live, or back then anyway, lived in your town?
Like 7,000, 6,000.
Okay, that's even my town is small. Yeah. And it's like, I think now it's something like 18,000 or so. Okay. But I refer to my town as being pretty small, and 7,000.
Yeah. It's in Europe they would definitely call it a village. You know, it makes me remember that the Czech language has, I think, a lot more words for different sizes of towns than we have in the U.S. Like they would say what translates to village for something the size of my town, but I would still say it's a town both mine and yours would be towns, and even
Right.
something that's super tiny with 500 people would still be a town. But they're actually quite different,
Yeah.
in terms of like the sizes and the opportunities and all that.
And have you come across this word in Czech that it's called městys,
Yes.
where I think it's a kind of between town and city.
Yes.
Where Prague is a city, but then a town is something like, let's say 10, 20,000 people
Right.
maybe. And I don't know exactly what a městys is, but maybe that's something kind of more like 50 or 100,000 people
Right.
maybe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then you have vesnica, right? And I guess I don't know what the smallest would be, or if there's more gradient. Vesnička, yeah.
Because you can make it so for those who don't know, like in Slavic languages, you can make a word even smaller by changing the ending. So if you have vesnica, you can make the ice into a ichka, and it makes it even smaller. It's the same in Russian. Did you notice any? They're called diminutives.
Right.
Did you notice any diminutives in Montenegrin?
That's a good question. I didn't notice hearing people speak.
Okay.
And I feel like I should have looked that up at one point, what it would be, but I'm not sure what it would be.
Yeah.
Probably something related to ichka or ishka or something like that. I know the word for cat in the language is machka, which I think is similar to Russian, right?
It's Slovak.
Oh, really?
So machka is cat
okay.
in Slovak, which is funny because
Okay.
Czech and Slovak are so similar.
Yeah.
You would think that cat would be the same word,
Right.
but it's kochka and machka.
Right. Okay.
And cat in Russian is koshechka.
Oh, okay. So closer to Czech.
Yes.
Huh.
Closer to Czech, and it's for the female. So a female cat is koshechka. A male cat is kot,
Okay.
which is very funny because some Slavic languages have whale and cat to be similar.
Okay.
So like in Russian, whale is kit.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's the same in I think actually in Ukrainian, it's kit,
Is whale or is cat?
is cat.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah.
So kind of what Russians do, or Russian speakers do, is when they want to play with the word cat, they'll say kit.
Okay.
And it's just a funny way of playing with words,
Huh. Interesting. Interesting.
which I really love.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the same feeling that the native Russian
Sure.
speakers have with it, but for me, it's also enjoyable.
Cool. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
And then, so my biggest question for you that I'm sure you get asked by Czechs also is like, why Czech?
Yes.
Like I know why I started learning, and it's still a pretty random story, but
right.
you don't have any relation with Czech.
Right.
Your family isn't Czech or anything like that. So like, why did you start speaking Czech? Or
Yes.
learning?
Yes. Yeah. I do get asked that all the time, especially by Czech speakers. And it's hard to put myself back in the shoes that I was when I first came here. But so I first started learning Czech during a summer abroad program through Harvard. So it was 11 students and our professor, who was from Prague, here for like 8 weeks to learn. It counted for 2 semesters of the language. And so I think that the first impetus that led me to Czech was wanting to learn a language over the summer during university.
And you said, I don't care what language it is. I just want it to be a small class easy or something like that.
Well, yeah, but that was partly it. And I didn't want to continue with Spanish because I knew a bit of Spanish and I wanted to do something new. But at the same time, I wanted something that was different in its grammatical structure than English. So, by this point, I was just finished my sophomore year of school, and I was already like a linguistics student. So I had some introduction to linguistics and wanted to, expose myself to a different grammar in order to understand linguistics better. Language, capital L language better.
So it was because of the grammar, even not because you wanted a different sounding language with a different alphabet and
Right.
different sounds. It was actually the grammar.
I would say it was because of the grammar. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Or that was, I didn't choose Czech because of grammar per se, but I think that when I thought about, okay, what makes languages different in an interesting way, I would say that that's grammar above many other things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because for me, if the grammar is even different, I think I could still understand it if the words are similar enough. So for me, the most important thing for me was the sound, I guess, but how does it look? Actually, maybe that was the most important thing. I wanted to be able to write notes because I like secret notes and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You remember my secret alphabet?
Definitely.
So I wanted to be able to write things, maybe notes for my classes, and no one could understand them just by looking at them. That was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. That was definitely a cherry on top for me as well. I think it's super cool to this day to be able to write down notes in Czech around my American friends, and not have them understand it. But I think the grammar being different was a reason, a big reason. On top of that, actually, my mother's cousin lives in the Czech Republic, and so that was another factor that led me to want to go to Prague, because I'd never met my mom's cousin. He's an American as well. He has been living here for like 30, 40 years. So that was another reason. And then, honestly, the biggest reason that it ended up happening was I applied to this program that was going to come to Prague, and I got a grant to do it. So it was made relatively easy to take the leap and to come join. And then I came here and started learning Czech in Prague, and then immediately I just fell in love and wanted to continue. But that's,
So I was just about to ask how long it would have taken you to feel that desire to fall in love with it and really like it, because I think I knew that I liked the language, but for me, the beginning was a little difficult because I had to adjust to the new grammar.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you also had some kind of period where you felt a little, let's say, depressed, or you felt a little discouraged by something about the language.
Yeah.
Or if you just had love for it the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I pretty much was really excited about it the whole time. I think, thinking about the grammatical tables with all of the declensions and, all the conjugations, sort of looking at that as a table and just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to remember this. It's like more cases than Latin. Yep. Those are the moments, if any, that is discouraging. But I think I took it as an exciting challenge pretty much from the start. Now, I feel like I have not still learned everything that I could, and probably I could be taking on the challenge a bit more at this point, to really understand all of the intricacies of the grammar. But I think it was mostly a positive feeling.
So was there any point where you started to say, okay, I actually feel comfortable with all the different cases and it's not actually so scary as I once thought? Did you ever have that kind of moment? If it was one moment like, now I get it?
Man, I don't know if it happened as an individual moment. If I compare now to back then, definitely it's changed and I feel comfortable. But I don't remember a specific moment when it happened. I think that there were moments when I think I've had some dreams in Czech, or some dreams about speaking Czech. And those were moments when I realized, oh my gosh, I think I really am getting it, People always say that about languages, right? When you start dreaming in a language, that's when you know it.
Yeah.
But those would be the moments that I think about probably.
And do you get the same response that I kind of get from Czechs when I tell them I speak and I demonstrate that a little bit, and they say, wow, Czech must have been so hard to learn. The way I respond in that moment is I tell them, no, it actually wasn't hard. I really loved it. It's super interesting. And I always try to display my passion for it. How do you attack that question when someone says, if someone says to you, Czech must have been super hard.
Right. Yeah.
You speak well, but Czech is super hard. How do you respond to those moments?
Yeah. I mean, that's an extremely common comment to have. And it's usually from someone in Czech. And we're usually speaking Czech when we do it. So, My response is always, yeah, it's really hard, but it's so worth it. And I love the language. I think it's really beautiful. I think I always come to how beautiful I think the language is.
Okay.
It's not something that's just sort of like hard for, I don't know, with no payoff or just for the sake of being hard. It's like learning, I don't know, how to paint really well. Like you have something that you're super proud of and there's a lot of beauty in at the end of it, you know? And I do think that Czech is really beautiful as a language. It's, the word order, the way that you can change the word order like Latin, I think it's really beautiful.
I think one of the best things for me was when I finally understood and could use the cases competently. And I finally started to say like, wow, I actually kind of wish we still had this in English.
Yeah.
I found myself saying, I love the fact that I can take words and put them into a creative order. It's a very creative language, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And the word order does carry some kind of purpose, you know. Words at the beginning or at the end will carry a different kind of emphasis.
Yeah, exactly.
So in a way, there is some kind of structure to it. But at the end of the day, I've had a lot of times where I ask my friends, how does this sentence look? You know, did I write it correctly? Should I change this word? Should I put it here instead of there? And I think more often than not, they basically tell me, you know, it's not really wrong. And I completely understand what you're saying.
Right.
Maybe I would change this, but like, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Technically for putting it the way that you put it.
Yeah.
And for me, I think I don't take that as like a thing that makes Czech hard then. I think I take it as something that makes it actually easier to say, yes, there's a pretty free word order, but that means you're more likely to create a good sentence.
You're right.
You don't have to worry about, I think the same way in English, like this word before that one.
Right.
And I just think that's a really awesome thing about Czech and Slavic languages in general, because the case system, I think, is in probably just about every language.
Right.
The Slavic languages tend to have more cases with more endings, but like even German has cases. I think there's 4. And now that I'm learning Greek a little bit, there are, I think, 4 or 5 cases.
Okay.
But what I've noticed is that typically only one case will bring some kind of a change. So, so that in the other 3 cases, the word will be like the first case. They all look the same, and it's very normal.
Yeah.
But
so on all nouns, there are 4 cases.
I have to look at it more. I haven't gone too deep into Greek just yet. But one of the first things that I want to tackle with it is, I know you have a case system. How do you work?
Yeah.
And I want to wrap my brain around that, because I think that's what I would do. I think that's what I would do, similar to how I think I learned Czech. I focused on the grammar points more than the vocabulary points at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think my mindset was, I can't make a sentence if I don't understand the grammar.
Right.
So what's the point of me knowing these words?
Yeah, totally.
So I think I wanted to get a grasp of the grammar first, and then I could build my vocabulary and put these words into the kind of foundation that I have understood.
Yeah, I think that's similar to how I did it actually. My first summer of learning Czech, or the first exposure to it, was really focused in, these tables, right, that I was talking about, like the grammatical tables, and those are my biggest memories of that first summer, is learning the grammar without the vocabulary, actually, or on a limited set of vocabulary, right, like only the words that are minimal pairs or distinguish different grammatical rules from each other, right? So like the canonical, like masculine animate versus feminine word, etc.
Right.
And then after, quote unquote, mastering the grammar or getting better at it, nowadays my studying is really vocabulary based and really conversation based with that. And to be honest, I don't look at those tables very much anymore, because I tried to over-index on it earlier on to learn them and then fill them in with words, as you said. Yeah.
So my camera is about to die.
Okay.
And I think that this will be a good time to take a little break, but
Cool.
Stay tuned for part 2.
All right.
Now, you were mentioning to me at a different point that you actually don't like when people say that Czech is hard.
Yeah. So I think that, when we speak about, Czech as a really difficult language, that's something that people say a lot, right? But for me, there's a difference if it's being said by somebody who's a native in Czech and somebody who's learning Czech. So, when I hear it a ton from native speakers, and I think that they know that it's a hard language, and I think there's a little bit of pride in it being such a difficult one, and they say it because they're impressed when people learn it, but then people who learn it also have this view that it's the super hard language, and with that one, when I hear it from them, I'm a little bit, my response is different, because I don't subscribe or like the idea of a language being super, super hard, giving you an excuse to sort of not learn it, or to maybe not try super hard learning it or something like this, And I think that sometimes that enters into the dialogue or enters into the conversation when it's, people who are learning the language just saying, oh, it's super hard. It's like the hardest language to learn,
Right. Like just because it's not, 1 + 1, it's something extra, but
Right.
like just because it's not the simplest thing ever, that's not a reason to not try.
Right. Yeah.
And like we were saying before, the cases are a pretty daunting thing when you just look at it in the realm of Czech or Slavic languages, but that's not a reason to not try. And we actually found beautiful things after trying it and after having a good amount of time with it. So like it's scary at the beginning, but there's probably, I would bet, something beautiful on the other end of it.
Right. Exactly. And when I think about it as well, now I know a lot of Czech now, so it's a little bit hard to put myself back in the position of somebody who doesn't know any Czech and comparing how hard is Czech to how hard are other languages. But, trying to put myself in that position, I still think it's not the hardest language I could imagine, I mean, even comparing it to Polish, I think Polish should be harder for me to learn because you've got all the grammar of Czech and the letters are super weird looking and like it's not intuitive how they turn into sounds, or for me, Russian would be also probably harder than Czech because it uses Cyrillic, right? So there's that extra barrier. So, and then any sort of East Asian language, I think would also be probably harder than Czech, So I don't think it's like the hardest language. Yeah.
And you're saying it's harder just because it's for you specifically, because of you and your background as a native English speaker who then had a little bit of Spanish, who learned Czech, and then you jump to something like Chinese.
Right.
You're not saying Chinese is some kind of higher step for, let's say, a Japanese person.
Right. Yeah. There's no such thing as sort of the hardest language in the world. You're always comparing to, okay, how different is something for me compared to my background or based on my background. Yeah, that's true.
So now you say you speak a little bit Czech, and I know I'm putting you on the spot probably, but could we maybe něco říct trochu česky pro diváky?
Určitě, jo.
Já bych chtěl uslyšet tvoje ř.
Ř, jo, dobře. Tak ř.
OK, super.
Řeřícha, to je klasické slovo, že? Ř, jo.
Yeah, super.
Well, actually, when we speak about ř, I mean, it's a super difficult sound to make in Czech, right? And I mean, the story I hear is that Czech is the only language with this sound.
Fun fact, actually, I heard the same thing. And I think that's one of the things that I heard in the beginning of learning Czech.
Right.
Apparently, it actually exists in a second language.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what that language is off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But I had to look into this because I got some comments, I think, on some video or something saying that r actually is in some different language. I forget if it's Africa or somewhere in Europe.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
yes.
Okay.
Now, that language is probably a much lesser language, not
Sure.
spoken by very many people, but it
Right.
exists. And
Right.
it's not fair to technically say that Czech is the only language with it. Now, I learned how to say r in my way, and I have
Yeah.
a video describing that where I basically took r and j, and I put those two sounds together. R, j, r, 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 r,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious how you learned it, given that you had actual formal education with Czech, and I had to just do everything on my own through some YouTube videos and stuff like that. So how did you learn the sound?
Yeah. So this gets into my formal Czech education, but also it's relevant that I studied linguistics. So like I had taken classes in linguistics for this, because I think the most helpful thing for me in learning not only the but also how to pronounce any of the sounds in Czech was having taken a class in phonetics.
Okay.
So I took a class where we learned IPA and the whole IPA table, and like how your tongue actually sort of contributes to making sounds, and the shape of your mouth makes sounds, right?
And for those who don't know what IPA is, can you just explain that? real
Sure.
quick?
So IPA is the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it is the international standard for how to sort of symbolize different sounds. So there's this. You can see like on Wikipedia. Usually, if there's a word wants to tell you how to pronounce it, there are these interesting symbols that are sort of somehow letters, somehow these other symbols, right? That is the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet.
It's actually funny. I love IPA because itself is kind of a foreign language.
Yes, totally.
And it's definitely something I wrote a couple like secret notes in, like, oh, today my science classes, I'm gonna write my notes in IPA.
Yeah.
And it's just funny because like it's me writing in English but with different symbols, and it's really fun. But so how did IPA help you?
Yeah, so IPA is super cool because it's an alphabet, and there's a specific sort of table that it sort of is represented in, right? So you can put it into a table that's almost like the periodic table of elements, right? Like where that shows you how sort of different sounds are grouped together, So in the IPA table, the sound for s, sh, z, zh, they're next to each other in a logical way, right? And it teaches you how the sounds are similar because your mouth is doing something similar, right? So s, z, right? I mean, it's the same mouth shape, s, z. The difference is if it's voiced or voiceless, right? S, your vocal cords aren't vibrating. Z, they are, right? And so learning IPA helps you to understand that in a systematic way. And there are a lot of these logical ways that sounds differ, right? Like, s, j, t, ch, f, v, right? I mean, that's just voice versus voiceless. But there are all of these sort of patterns and structures that you understand. And so then when it comes to learning Czech, I found that actually the diacritics, specifically háčky, right, this symbol, in Czech, the way that it's written, follows the logical structure of IPA, right? So you have háčky on several letters, on the S, on the C, on the Z, and on the R, in terms of consonants, right? Am I missing one?
You're missing technically D, T, and N. But it just gets written in a different way. You don't have like an upside. You don't have a V on the letter. You have just like an apostrophe. Unless it's the capital letter, then the capital letters have the actual V on it. Right.
That's true. But sort of for my purposes, I would focus on I think they're called fricatives, right? So s, t, z.
I was really hoping to avoid fricatives because when I had my phonetics classes, we learned all the fricatives, and I can't even think of the other words right now. But I told specifically Jovan, I said, okay, if you're going to do some research before we have a discussion about stuff like this, okay, well, that's fine. Just don't come here talking to me about fricatives.
Right.
Because I know they're a thing. I don't remember what they are.
Yeah. And I should remember more than I do. The word that I'm intending to say is the one that that talks about if something, like if you hold it out over time. So right. It's different than t, because you can say s and you keep going, right?
Yeah. You can't hold it.
You can't hold it
sound.
Right, exactly. I think the word is fricative. I hope it is.
Okay, well.
Anyway, so that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so anyway, the hot check. When you see that on a fricative, it means move your tongue back in your mouth.
Okay.
So s, sh, s, sh.
Right.
So if you say s, sh, you can tell your tongue is just moving it back a little bit. There's a little bit of a difference, right? Besides that, but to simplify, your tongue is just moving back.
Yeah.
And that would be, correspond to like looking at the IPA table, moving from like one row to the next row, right? S, sh. Hot check with z, z, j. It's sort of the same move,
Yeah. I
z,
feel that.
j, s, sh, z, j, t, ch. Similar. So I found this pattern, and then I've applied it to the r sound, and it turns into r, r. R, r.
Okay.
S, sh, r, r. So in every case, you're sort of moving your tongue back a little bit.
Okay.
So that was, it's a long story, but that was sort of the thing that unlocked for me to help me to pronounce r.
And did your teacher offer? Now your teacher was American or Czech or?
My teacher for Czech was Czech.
Okay.
My teacher for phonetics was American.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did your teacher offer you guys any kind of support or advice for how to actually pronounce r?
My Czech teacher, I forget how she explained it. I think she would have explained it the way that you talked about it, right? It's like a r mixed with a j, really close after it, then you say them together. I think it's, that's the standard way that I've heard it explained. And
Okay.
yeah, so this was something that I came up with sort of just from thinking about the IPA table myself.
And then now, I think you were alone in that class actually, or did you have other students with you?
My Czech class.
Yeah.
I took the first exposure to Czech was the summer abroad in Prague, and that was with 10 other students. And then I continued studying in university for the next 4 semesters after that. So the first year that I studied with my professor in college there were 2 in the class. 2 and sometimes 3 maybe. And then the second year, which was my senior year, it was just me. So the one-on-one tutoring happened only in senior year.
Okay. Yeah. So and how did the other students do with the letter?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of students, they never cracked it during our summer in Prague. I think that it remained difficult there were 11 of us, and I want to say maybe 4 were able to say it sort of like properly by the end. Yeah.
And how do you think that your Czech has evolved since moving here and living here full time? Have you seen an increase, an improvement in some way, a decrease in your Czech in some areas?
Yeah.
Is it kind of staying the same, or what do you think about it?
Yeah. So the way that I learn Czech nowadays, I don't have any formal training in it anymore since college. I take a lesson once a week with a tutor that's supported by my company. But unfortunately, I'm not using it as much as I expected in my work, just because sort of it's a fast-paced business environment and everybody's speaking English, there. So it's not increasing. My ability is not increasing as much as fast as I would like nowadays. It's mainly conversational focused. And let's see. So how is it different now? I think something that I think is funny about my Czech nowadays is I have certain sort of conversational threads and sort of types of discussions that I'm able to have very fluently. Because those are the types of things that my tutor and I speak about when we have our lessons, And so I learn, of course, I know the grammar well enough, and I learn enough vocabulary to sort of really be comfortable in those situations. And of course it stretches like meals, ordering things in restaurants. I mean, all of the sort of the typical things that you would do during the day in the city, interacting with people. But then certain topics, just based on having spoken about them with my tutor, I can speak about fluently.
So are you more like overall everything is increasing, or are you kind of more like situationally increasing?
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that I would say that in certain situations I'm getting more and more close to fluent. But you can then put me into a different situation, and just based on the vocabulary and the topics, I will sound much less fluent because I have less practice in that style of vocabulary, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But something that I think is funny that I'd like to discuss this with you actually. I can convince people in certain situations that I am a native speaker because, people say that I have a pretty good accent and, the and all this. So I can sort of affect the dialect that makes people think that I'm basically fluent. Mm-hmm. And so it's then surprising to them that in other situations I'm not as fluent. And so I'm in this situation that I think is unique, or that I haven't seen in other language learners, particularly English language learners, right? So, where I'm not fluent yet, I still have a long ways to go, but in certain situations, like I do talk like I'm fluent.
So you feel like English language learners kind of just have like one competency level for basically everything, where you don't see necessarily spikes in their ability to talk about this thing or that thing.
Right. Exactly. So when I think about somebody who, talking like we are right now, they would sound like perfect English speaker, and then we talk about something else, and all of a sudden they have a very thick accent and they don't know the grammar. I don't experience that with people I meet.
Yeah, I would say I actually don't experience that either as well, now that I have to think about it.
Exactly.
People who learned English actually have much better English than I have Czech. And I think it also touches on like different, just in general, things, because when you're at school, or if you're having an actual formal class, you're probably learning more topics than I personally covered in my self-study. Right. And I feel like they have tests, they have homework assignments and stuff like that. They have grades that, that they have to get. And for them, even if they don't really want to learn or something, I still feel like those kinds of requirements that they have to fulfill pushes their English to be good in these kind of overall in this overall setting. Yeah. Whereas with my Czech, I was able to focus on very specific things. So if I'm talking to you about weather, I can do that super well. But the moment we try to dive into something like what am I eating tomorrow? And given that I don't eat very many things, I kind of stick to my one little diet. The moment I have to say some like other fruits or vegetables or something, that's where I'll slow down, and I'll maybe have some struggles saying these probably new words, even if they're relatively common foods, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For me, it's sort of utensils around the kitchen. Like, these are very basic words, like the words for plate and cupboard and pot and pan. Sometimes I forget these words, but then I can tell you sort of very specific words in a different situation, right? Because
it's always funny for me when someone knows a super niche word and then they don't know how to say computer.
Right. Exactly.
It's funny how languages just work like that, but I think it just goes to people typically learn, or they'll at least remember the things that they need to know. Yeah. So, if you're some worker in physics, you don't need to have any vocabulary about construction work. Right. It's a completely different world. Even if those words like cement or something are very basic, it's still not necessary for you. And what I actually wanted to hear from you is there any tips you would offer people who are learning, let's say, any language? Okay. Like, do you have any tips for how to approach a language, or anything you wish you would do differently, anything you would have done differently at the beginning that you only learned later?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. Well, I think one thing that I am glad that I did the way that I did it in this classroom setting was actually starting with a like systematic programmatic grammar education. I think that that was really useful. And it meant that we were not jumping into speaking immediately. I mean, we did some speaking immediately, but we learned sort of the grammatical structures like themselves per se, right? And then we're speaking on top of that. I think it was useful to actually have to study in that way because, well, I'm not sure why actually, but I think that it was useful because I sort of have a systematic understanding of like what I'm doing when I say different grammatical things or types of things, right? Rather than just sort of knowing through intuition how to say them. And I think that people are intimidated by looking at, you know, at grammar like tables because, you know, it's not attached to, I don't know, a specific sentence, or it can be harder to learn than just sort of copying a sentence, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth doing, basically. So anything you can do to make that sort of an interesting study would be useful at the beginning for me. I don't know if that, I think that's how you learned as well, right?
I really, with Czech, I actually, I kind of struggle to remember what actually I learned.
Yeah.
Because I know that I studied the cases. I know that I studied the tenses to know that they exist and roughly how they worked. So for anyone who knows Czech out there, like I started, you know, learning the, let's say, conditional tense. And I knew that to say I would like, you know, I'd have to use this word bych.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if I'm using he, she, it, I need to use this word be. And I don't really know what that means right now. I don't know where that comes from, but I know that that's part of the structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I kind of built my language around, well, I know the structure and I know kind of, you know, the words I need. I know that I need the past tense of my verb plus this bych or bis, whatever. And then I go on with my sentence.
Right.
So it just gave me a little bit of a foundation to work off of. And I think that helps.
Yeah, I think so. And it gives you, like, it trains you of a style of thinking, which is like an awareness of syntax and grammar, you know? And I think that that's useful when you're learning a language to sort of know, okay, I'm going into the past tense now, you're right? Or I'm going into the conditional tense now, right? And to be able to actually just have an awareness of the way that you speak and the structures that you need. I think in general life, we don't think in that way. But if you can sort of get into that mode, then it's easier to remember that, okay, I'm going into conditional, so that means I need bych or something like this. You know?
Right. What I try to stress to my students is, for example, if we're using the present perfect, I tell them, forget everything else.
Right.
We need 3 words. We need a person, we need have or has, and then we need our third form of the verb.
Right.
Or the past participle. I tell them we need these 3 things. Right. So when we go into making our structures now, when we try to make some sentences, if we are missing something, if we only have 2 words, I want you to tell me what we're missing because we need 3. So cool. I try to break it down into that kind of simplistic way so that they know I need 3 things. And I see that I just said, I done homework.
Right.
Well, I wasn't even talking about homework before. So we have 2 things. We're missing something. I want them to just get into a kind of habit of knowing that. And then they can get more advanced where it becomes 2 things because you can contract I and have. So it's I've done.
Right.
But at the very basic form, when most students are most comfortable with spelling everything out. Yeah. Most students don't want to say I've. Right. They want to still say I have. And that's fine. At some point, you'll get more comfortable and learn that to sound more native, at least as an American, we contract it to I've. But I try to add numbers into it like that. Or the simple past. Okay, well, what's the difference between past simple and present perfect? Past simple has 2 words.
Right.
I did, or I was.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to make it that basic.
Yeah.
With them.
Yeah, that's nice. And so like one thing is knowing that, okay, when I'm in the situation, when I'm in the past perfect situation or the present perfect situation, here is the rule that I follow, right? And then the second level is recognizing when I'm in that situation, right? When I move away from the, okay, we're practicing this thing 10 times in a row, into a conversation, being able to pick up on, oh, I'm in this situation where I need the 3 words or the 2 words, and I think that's something that if you can build that habit just in everyday life is really useful as well.
And the camera is about to cut right now, so see you again in part 3.
Okay.
So anyway, so I want to go back real quick to what you were saying about like working on the grammar and kind of like that. So you're saying you would advise people to work a lot, maybe more, on at the beginning understanding the language and understanding how it works.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of this is my bias having studied linguistics, where we did a lot of the studying of, okay, taking words out of the equation, how do sentences fit together, and how does the structure, the bones of a language, or of a sentence sort of work. And when I want to communicate something, sort of what are the structures that I'm going to need to use to communicate that, depending on when it happened, tense, and how I feel about it, and there are a lot of sort of things that you can, that you might want to convey that impact sort of the tools you need to pull out of the toolbox, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And was there anything that you experienced while studying Czech that you think you would do differently? Like this, maybe this strategy actually turned out to be just a waste of time, or like this was actually not helpful.
Right. Yeah.
Did you have any like, let's say, bad influences?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I spoke about the thing that I did that I would recommend in terms of things that I would change. I would try to insert more Czech into my everyday life, just in a sort of what's the word? In a latent way, almost. Like watching something on Netflix, it's easy enough to add Czech subtitles, right? Or to actually watch it in Czech with English subtitles.
Yeah.
You can still enjoy it, and maybe if I think that in these little moments when I was sort of going about my everyday life, I wish I would have done more, just sort of putting Czech in there in as many ways as I could.
One friend of mine started to suggest, like, he started to look up things. Now it's a Czech friend who was learning English, working on his English. So what he said he started to do was he would Google things more often in English instead of just saying, okay, I want to know the size of a baseball. So what's the size of the baseball in Czech? Right. He would do that in English.
Right.
And it's, I think, kind of like what you're saying. It's like, you probably know how to say what is the size of, and you probably know how to say baseball.
Right.
So go that extra little step of search it in this different language, whether it's Czech, Spanish, whatever language you're learning.
Yeah.
But try to do those little things in that other language.
Yeah.
Because it's useful. I mean, your brain knows your native language already. You're not gaining anything by searching it in your native language, probably, but you have everything to gain by doing that little search in a foreign language. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that especially if you've already done a few steps in the language, understanding the grammar a little bit and having, a bit of the structure in your brain for those sort of latent inputs to soak into and like contribute to, then I think it can be really, really useful. And it doesn't take that much extra effort, right? Or in a lot of cases, it's an easy switch to listen to some Czech music or some music in a different language rather than some random song in English, you know?
I think one of the things I started to do was on Instagram, I follow some people who are posting in my target language. And so when I look at their stories, it might be for 10, 20 seconds every day or something, but I'm at least exposing my eyes to the language. And for a split second there, I'm at least seeing Czech, and maybe I see an interesting word. Maybe I see a word and I'm like, I didn't know that I needed this word, but like, I'm happy that I found it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then maybe I go to a dictionary and I find this is an actually useful word for me.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Maybe that's not always the case, but, just having more exposure with the language, even if it's an extra 10, 20 seconds a day or a minute, or, you know, ideally more.
Yeah.
Any extra immersion you can give yourself is something to add.
Yeah.
And anytime you take away that immersion, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice.
Exactly. Yeah. And the best situation is to find something in the target language that is engaging to you, not only because it's the language, but because the content is exciting, right? Or is something that you want to learn about, or is entertaining, right?
Right. For me, for example, it's music.
Yeah.
I listen to all my music in foreign languages because that's my medium that I love. I just love music. So I'm very happy to do that in a different language.
Right. Yeah, and this makes me think of one last tip that I have, or one thing that I think is super useful for learning a language.
Yeah.
And I could say this is something I wish I would have done more of and would do more of on a regular basis. But I think that the best, or not the best, but a really nice piece of content that you can watch to learn a language better is, you know, the game show Family Feud.
Yes.
Yeah. So it turns out a lot of different countries have a version of Family Feud.
Okay.
The Czech version is called Pět proti pět, so 5 versus 5, right?
Yes.
But it's exactly the same structure of the game show, right? So, I mean, how does Family Feud work? It's 2 teams of people, and they're competing to sort of guess what a panel of random people have answered to certain questions, right?
And basically, just to make it even more simple, they're guessing vocabulary.
Exactly. They're guessing vocabulary. So, you know, in the English version, Steve Harvey, right, goes up. He asks 2 people, okay, you know, figure out what the answer to, or what the most common answer to this question was, right? What is something that you wouldn't want to find in your bed?
Yeah.
Right. So, and then they answer the question, and then they talk about the answer. Yeah. Right. So it actually has all of the elements that are really useful for picking up more of a language, right? So it's a simple question.
Yeah.
It's about something that is a common situation, right? So it's usually going to be using vocabulary that, you know, even a beginner would have some familiarity with, right? Yeah. What's something that you would like, that you wouldn't like to find in your bedroom, right?
Yeah. And some of the answers are like funny, but some of them are actually kind of serious, and still, like, you also get a little bit of culture because like the American Family Feud, you're going to get American answers. Right. And so then, because culture is a super big part of learning a language, you also have to understand the culture. Yeah. Like, why are Czechs talking about beer so much? Well, because beer is one of the most popular words you'll find probably in a Czech language. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so if you can add like that cultural stuff where they're playing with vocabulary, literally. Right. Yeah. I think I did maybe the same thing with like playing a little game show app in my phone in Italian. Right. Oh, that's cool. Which, you know, it has to be fun for you, though. Right, is the main thing. Exactly. If anything's going to be boring for you, you won't want to return to it, and that's the main thing. You have to want to have more, right? And you want to interact with it every day. Yes, yeah. And so I think that the candidate for me is this Family Feud show, because it's very entertaining, you know. And it has all of those elements, right? So, and I would recommend for anybody listening, watching, that if you want to improve your skills in language, look for the Family Feud, you know, equivalent in that language. Yeah. It's usually going to be there. I think that there are like 20 or more different versions of this show across languages. Yeah, I mean, it's like they're talking about the word. They'll give an answer, and they will then discuss the answer, right? They'll ask questions like, why did you say that?
right? Or what made you think of that?
Right,
that
right.
answer,
People
right?
have some funny stories. It's a
Yeah.
reference, maybe
Yeah.
some experience they had.
And then they'll write it on the board. And sometimes the word that the person said is not exactly the same as what's on the board, right? So you then learn some synonyms.
Right, and usually it's like a slang or it's like a
Right.
family-friendly way of saying
Yes.
it because
Yes.
it's made for adults, really.
Right.
And then you also learn like those other ways of saying it, and you get more vocabulary on top of the vocabulary they're giving you just by talking.
Yeah, yeah. And on top of it all, of course, it's usually pretty funny and it's pretty entertaining. So I think it's a great,
All right, well, thank you for all of your insight.
Sure.
I think I even learned something today, so...
Me too. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. So hopefully we'll see you again on another episode of this because there's so much more that we have to talk about. But
yeah, I feel like we could talk for hours. So definitely excited to talk again. And thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, and thank you for everybody who's listening, watching, commenting, subscribing, all that kind of stuff. You guys are actually doing a fantastic job. It's really fun for me to read the comments and watch the community kind of grow a little bit. And hopefully we can just do this more.
That's awesome.
So see everyone next time.